You may have noticed that Billy's not here, and in his place is a very tall, dark gentleman who happens to be Rabbi Robert Haas, who is a friend of Billy's and a neat guy. We welcome you into the service this morning, Rabbi Haas. Rabbi Haas is a native of McAllen, Texas, and he received his B.S. from the University of Texas. And he attended Hebrew Union College and received his rabbinic ordination in 2002. He spent a year serving in Africa before finding his way to Savannah to be the 14th spiritual leader of Congregation Mickve Israel, which happens to be one of the oldest, and I might add most interesting, Jewish congregations in the United States, and they are custodians of two. I thought it was just one, but it's two, and perhaps two more, right? 15th century deerskin Torah scrolls, believed to be the oldest in the United States and perhaps in the world. I find that fascinating. They have a marvelous museum. If you have not visited, you might want to go visit it. I first met him through our interfaith group, the Savannah Gathering, and he's also a stand-up comedian and an avid Star Wars fan. Just as him. And by the way, congratulations are in order. He arrived here 4 years ago as a bachelor. But in April, April of this year, he married April Commandant. And she is not with us this morning, but I understand that at their wedding reception, some characters from Star Wars showed up. So we welcome the very interesting Rabbi Robert Haas.
Thank you. For those of you who know me, know how apropos that is. They have this comic book conference sometimes in Savannah. You've heard of Comic-Con. They have a smaller one here, and I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and my wife is a huge Star Trek fan, so I went as a Jedi Knight, she went as Mr. Spock. And everybody kept going up to us and looking at us funny, and I kept saying, interfaith marriage. So live long and prosper. And I do want to apologize. Last year, as I mentioned, my congregation attempted a hostile takeover of your congregation, which failed. So Billy and I have decided that this year we're going to instead merge the congregations for the future. So this will now be Asbury, Israel. Congratulations. Oh, sorry. UMJC. I put the M first. How's that? So it's a pleasure to be here. As Jen mentioned, I just got married, so I'm very thrilled, and it's wonderful to be in a city now as a married person. And I'm sorry my wife is unable to be here, but she's a wonderful person. We all know she has. At least she has some serious issues, mostly her taste in men. But she's a wonderful person, and she sends her best. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about my views of the world, as always. And as many of you know, I volunteered in Africa. I volunteered with the gay rights, LGBT rights community in Africa. And so a while back in the States, I was at a club. I do a lot of comedy, so I go to clubs once in a while. I'm not a drinker, but I do like to stand up. And there was a woman who was either transvestite or transgender at the bar, and everybody was kind of ignoring her. And so I went up to her and introduced myself and said hi. I wanted to be nice and neighborly. And she didn't want to talk to me, understood. So I walked away. I tried to be nice and I understood that, she was being ignored and it was very difficult for her. A few weeks later, a friend of mine who was a comedian happened to be there, came up to me and said, you know that person you tried to talk to at the club who didn't want to talk to you, the person who was transvestite or maybe transgender? And I said, yes. Well, the reason she didn't talk to you, I learned because as soon as you walked away from her, she said, I can't believe they allow Jews in this bar. I kid you not. I'm going to start off by saying hate does not make sense, to say the least. I hate everyone of one race. I hate everyone of one religion. I hate everyone of one ethnicity, gender, age, location. I hate people simply because they're different than me. It just doesn't make any sense. In Judaism, we're asked to combat hate. If somebody hates me, I go up to them and I figure out what I did to them. I apologize, I make amends. But when you hate me just because I'm Jewish, I didn't do anything to you. That makes no sense. There's no way for me to make amends. In Europe today, anti-Semitism, hate against Jews, is on the rise. Why is that so ridiculous? Because there are no Jews in Europe. On the entire continent, there's less than 1 million Jews, almost all of them in France. So all this anti-Semitism is coming from people who have most likely never met a Jew in their entire life. Hate does not make sense. I hate people because of the color of their skin or because of their beliefs or their sexual orientation, when none of this affects me directly or most likely indirectly in any way. Hate does not make sense. I personally don't like racism, anti-Semitism, any of the other isms in this category. This is why I like living in America. I love America. We live in the land of the free. We live in the home of the brave. I'm an American, and I'm proud to be an American. I'm an American. I want people to hate me because they've met me. I want them to hate me because of the way I dress, because of my jokes are not very good, because my dancing skills are too overwhelming for them to understand. I want them to hate me because of me, not because I'm Jewish. The Bible tells us, do not despise an Edomite because he is your brother. What does this mean? The Edomites are considered the descendants of Esau. The Israelites are considered the descendants of Jacob. They were brothers. Even though it is many generations later and we're not brothers anymore, we're told don't hate the Edomites because we are still brothers, even several generations later. In other words, don't hate another group because we're all brothers and sisters in reality. Is it ever all right to hate, though? That's the theme of my sermon. The answer is, of course, no. It's never all right to hate, but sometimes at least it is understandable. Why? Because we're all human. We make mistakes. It is terribly difficult, we know, to refrain from hating when we have suffered terrible tragedies. That is understandable. I suffered a terrible tragedy. I hate somebody. It's not what we should do, but we're all human. However, in most cases, hate is not because of some terrible tragedy, which is at least on some level understandable. We hate the guy who cut us off the other day while we were driving. We hate our boss because he treats us poorly. We hate our cousin because he always borrows money from me. We hate the person who took the job from us. We hate the annoying person down the block whose dog barks late at night. We hate people who are different from us. A friend of mine was recently bemoaning the state of politics in his country of Israel, basically saying all the politicians over there are meshugana, which means crazy. I told him, I said, I am so happy that I live in America where we don't have crazy politicians. So thankful. Our politicians never villainize the other side. It's so good to be in America. In politics, we hate people because they are on the other party. I, as many of you, I'm sure, have listened to political speeches on the radio, on TV, on the internet, and I can't remember the last time I heard a Republican compliment a Democrat or a Democrat compliment a Republican. My question to them is, how can the other side always be wrong every single time? It's this kind of view that leads to hate. I'm always right, and you're always wrong, and because of that, I have the right to hate you. In Deuteronomy, we read, "Do not despise the Egyptian because you are a stranger in his land." That is a very powerful sentence if you're Jewish, because we were slaves for 400 years to the Egyptians, yet once we leave, what does God tell us? Even though you were slaves and they treated you really quite poorly for 400 years, you don't hate them. That is amazing. Judea Pearl, the father of the murdered journalist Daniel Pearl, I'm sure all of you have probably heard of him, was asked why is he working for reconciliation between Jews and Muslims, and he said something so powerful. "Hate killed my son, therefore I'm determined to fight hate." That is powerful. So the question then is asked, how do we combat hate? In some religions, the answer, of course, is love, which some believe is the opposite of hate. However, in Judaism, we actually don't look at it that way. In Judaism, the opposite of hate is not love. The opposite of hate is respect. Respect. How many of you love your parents or loved your parents? Mine are gone. How many of you loved your parents or love your parents? How many of you loved your parents every day of your life growing up as a kid? If you're raising your hand, you're a better person than I am, or you're not telling the truth just a little bit. We know there's something called the Ten Commandments. How many of you have heard of them? All right, I see at least 17 people whose hands went up. Next Saturday morning, please see me in my study for a little bit of a course on the Ten Commandments. In the Ten Commandments, it does not say love your parents. It says honor, or the Hebrew can also be translated probably more appropriately as respect your parents. From a Jewish perspective, love is an emotion. It can't always be controlled, whereas the word respect teaches us we can control respect. The word for love in Hebrew is ahava. The word for respect is kabed. Would you like to know the word for hate in Hebrew? Why? Why do you want to? What's wrong with you people? I'm trying to tell you this is not a tutorial on how to hate. This is an attempt to stop hate. I'm going to talk to Billy about that one. Honestly, though, it's easy, relatively easy, to show respect for our family members, for our friends, for people we like, or people who are like us, or people who have similar opinions to us. Respect is really much more important for those who are different than us. Those who have different views, those who may not even like us. The Talmud teaches us just because someone hates you doesn't mean you hate them. What is the use of only having respect for people who are just like us? That's why I take certain pride in the fact that I have friends who have views that are on the polar opposite spectrum of mine. And I'm not talking about the simple stuff. I'm talking about the difficult stuff, the divisive issues, such as gay marriage, gun control, abortion, support for America's team, the Dallas Cowboys. We have different opinions. And quite frankly, I can control my respect for them on all of them except for the Dallas Cowboys, which is America's team. So from a Jewish perspective, to combat hate, we need to learn to show respect for as many people possible, even when their views don't mimic our own. After all, in truth, if we look at ourselves, we're going to find most of the time we're very similar. Religions are very similar. People are very similar. We have different opinions here and there, but most of the time we're almost the same. I'll give you an example. I just was married. Very happy to be married. It's interesting because we have a very similar wedding ceremony to Christians. You walk down the aisle. You stand next to each other. A minister or rabbi pronounces you married. You say prayers. But there are subtle differences. For instance, in Judaism, we don't like procrastination. So we don't have the line, does anyone here have a reason they should not be married? Say it a week earlier, buddy. But yet I had a terrible dream right before my wedding. I dreamt that I was standing there next to my beautiful wife-to-be, and a person stood up after the rabbi asked this question, is there anyone out there who thinks they should not be married? And this person stands up and says, she should not marry him. She could have had somebody of respect, a person who made more money, a more wonderful person, somebody who was a doctor or even a lawyer, someone of worthiness. And as a rabbi, of course, you know, I don't get angry often, but in my dream, I got angry, as you can imagine. I stood up and I turned and I said, Mom. I'm not a doctor, deal with it. Most of the time, differences are cultural and they're slim. But when we show respect for other people, we improve the world in every possible way. Martin Luther King said, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. From a Jewish perspective, we would only change one thing: respect can do it. Unfortunately, though, we are each fallible, so inevitably we fail on a daily basis. We look at a tragedy in the news and we blame everyone for that group that perpetrated the act. We use stereotypes in our regular conversations. We show disrespect covertly, sometimes even overtly. For Jews, our holiest book is called the Torah. It is the first 5 books of the Bible. I'm not going to test you. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The test will be on the spelling. In this book, each week we read a passage, a section. So by the end of the year, we've read the whole thing. So we start in Genesis 1:1, we finish in Deuteronomy. So this week, there's an important passage that sets an important precedent, because sometimes we hate and we don't even know it. Sometimes we show disrespect and we don't even know it. In ancient society, we all know that women did not have the rights they should have had. Women couldn't even vote in our country until 1920, and still around the world we know they don't always have the rights they should. So in this portion, there are a group of women known as the daughters of Zelophehad, several of them. Their father was a supporter of Moses, but he had died. And once he died, their property was going to others because they had no brothers. They weren't allowed to own property. So, I would like to say they petition Moses, but they don't. They tell Moses, you will give us this property because our father was dedicated to you. Moses doesn't even know how to answer. So what does he do? He does what we all wish we could do. He goes and asks God. And God says they are right. You need to give them rights to this property. Now, women didn't have equal rights back then, but this is an unprecedented step where women could own property. It's the same type of steps we need to continue in our country. Often we don't even know who we don't show respect towards. It's so natural towards us. It was automatic back then. Women don't inherit land, it goes to the men. These are the things we need to combat mostly. Where do we show disrespect when we don't even realize it? Where do we use stereotypes so automatically we don't even think about changing them? Where do we hate when we know we shouldn't? For most of us here, the answer is simple. It is small steps. We're all good people. We're not the people out there that are hating large groups and doing terrible things. We're the ones who are hating a little here and there and not paying attention. I'm asking all of us today to just learn to show a little bit more respect. Try and show respect for the people you don't usually show respect for. The ones who have different opinions, the ones who may do things they shouldn't do. Just because you don't agree with someone doesn't mean you can't respect them. I think the world will be just a little bit better if each of us can learn to combat hate with both love and respect. And we're doing some wonderful things here. We live in a great state, if you didn't realize. Georgia's an amazing place. I'll give you an example. My wife and I, well, my fiance and I went to the marriage license center, the courthouse, to get our marriage license. And I'm sitting next to two gentlemen who are getting married to each other. And as we're leaving, I see that those two gentlemen are going and getting their picture taken. And this alarmed me, because I've done a lot of marriages and weddings in this state. And I also had just gotten my marriage license, and they didn't require me to have my picture taken. They didn't require my wife to have her picture taken. So did you imagine, I know the law says that both men and women and men and women could get married, but I didn't know if the law said there were any separate restrictions. So I got a little alarmed, so I went over to see what was going on. They were getting their gun licenses. This is a great state we live in. You can get hitched and armed in the exact same place. Thank you. God be with all of you. Amen.